Thank you for joining us on a special edition of WVP Radio. You're listening to Living Light with Michael Edward. For downloads of this broadcast, please go to worldvisionportal.org, or for the radio broadcast, go to blogtalkradio.com/WVP. And hopefully you're catching this on video at YouTube, youtube.com/WVP Radio. We'd like to discuss on this special broadcast something very important, not only to the residents that live along the Gulf Coast at the Gulf of Mexico, but to everyone in the world, as we feel this affects everyone. Currently, it mostly affects those in the Gulf of Mexico living along the coast, as I do. But we know if this isn't handled properly, it will affect everyone very quickly, and we need to let you know what the truth is. That's what this broadcast is all about. So thank you again for joining us in this special edition of WVP Radio. The Gulf Blue Plague. You know, it's not wise to fool Mother Nature. Those who think they can get away with it will abruptly learn that payback can be more than they bargained for. That's because nature will always retaliate in subtle retorts that shake the very foundations of this earth, as well as life itself. Playing the role of creator is a very dangerous game. As part of their new logo and corporate image campaign, British Petroleum wants the public to think of them as their new slogan says, Beyond Petroleum. BP is far more than a simple oil company. What is revealed in this broadcast regarding BP and their Beyond Petroleum activities, both prior to and including their Gulf of Mexico catastrophe, will create a picture for the listener, one pixel dot at a time. Once the person who hears everything presented here connects all the dots of this picture, it will be more than obvious that BP has tried to fool Mother Nature. And she's retaliating with a vengeance that is affecting the entire world. This is a perilous game that has now gotten out of control. What began in the Gulf of Mexico as early as February 2010 has now escalated into a man-made, synthetic, biological nightmare of unknown proportions. Let's address synthetic genomics. On June 13, 2007, BP made a long-term research and development deal and an undisclosed equity investment into a company named Synthetic Genomics Incorporated based in Rockville, Maryland. Synthetic Genomics was co-founded by Dr. J. Craig Venter with the purpose of commercializing genomic-driven technologies. Genomics is the scientific study of the entire DNA sequence of an organism's genome. A genome is all the genetic information in the chromosomes of an organism, including its genes and DNA sequences. Now, the BP Synthetic Genomics Alliance has recovered the DNA from subsurface hydrocarbon substrates. What that means is biological organisms in crude oil. And they've applied that recovered DNA through sequencing methods. What this means is that they took the DNA from underground crude oil reservoir microbial cells, such as bacteria or viruses, and cultured them in a lab to identify, isolate, and interpret their chemical and genetic properties. Additional sequencing methods beyond the initial identity and isolation stages were also carried out. Now, a central part of the deal between BP and synthetic genomics was to create biological transfer processes for crude oil that would lead to improved recovery rates. Their goal was to develop new microbes with lab-created genomes that would improve the flow of gas and oil from out of an oil reservoir. Now, for an oil producer like BP, more oil and gas being recovered from a source means more profits. And in fact, many wells and many oil reservoirs for crude oil only produce about 50% because of the problems in getting it out of the wellhead. So this process of increasing the flow of oil, or the improved recovery rate, is known as microbial enhanced oil recovery, or MEOR. Now, MEOR is simply the use of microorganisms such as bacteria or viruses or any kind of microorganism to retrieve additional petroleum production from out of an oil reservoir. Microorganisms are introduced or injected into oil wells to produce byproducts which help propel the oil out of the well. Now, because these processes help to mobilize the oil and assist with the oil flow, they allow a greater amount to be recovered from the well. MEOR is a direct application of biotechnology. It uses biological materials such as bacteria, microorganisms, and the products of their metabolism to assist the movement of oil out of a well. Other applications include genetic engineering techniques and recombinant DNA technology, and they're used to develop new strains of bacteria with improved oil recovery traits. The microorganisms can be applied to an entire oil reservoir where they grow between the oil and the well's rock surface to enhance oil recovery in these ways. The first way is biosurfactant production. Microorganisms produce slippery substances called surfactants as they break down the oil. Because they're naturally produced by biological microorganisms, they're referred to as biosurfactants. Now, these biosurfactants act like slippery detergents, and they help the oil move more freely away from the rocks and crevices. Second way is the reduction of the oil viscosity. Now, oil is naturally a thick fluid that's very viscous, meaning it doesn't flow very easy. Microorganisms help break down the molecular structure of the crude oil, making it more fluid and easier to recover. Then the third is production of carbon dioxide gas. Now, as a byproduct of metabolism, microorganisms produce carbon dioxide gas. Over time, this gas accumulates and displaces the oil, driving it up and out of the ground. Let's talk about patents pending. The BP Synthetic Genomics Alliance was centered on developing new microorganisms with lab-created genomes, or synthetic DNA, to improve the outflow of gas in oil reservoirs. That alliance was publicly announced on June 13, 2007. As to what prior date the actual agreement was made is a corporate privacy matter. However, less than 2 weeks before the public announcement, on May 31st, 2007, U.S. Patent Application number 20070122826 was published claiming exclusive ownership of a set of essential genes in a synthetic, free-living organism that can grow and replicate, that's made using those genes. An international patent application at the World Intellectual Property Organization was filed. That number is WO2007047148 and was published on April 27th, 2007. And that patent application names more than 100 countries where they are seeking monopoly patents. The company that applied for the patents was the J. Craig Venter Institute, or JCVI, a nonprofit company founded by genetic scientist J. Craig Venter, who also founded Synthetic Genomics, BP's business alliance partner. Both are based in Rockville, Maryland, and by no coincidence, Synthetic Genomics Incorporated sponsors or pays for fundamental research at JCVI. Since BP has a developmental and research deal as well as an undisclosed amount of equitable stock ownership with Synthetic Genomics, it's obvious who's paying for these synthetic genetic research and results at JCVI. Let's begin connecting the dots so you can see the picture. The BP wells at Mississippi Canyon 252 in the Gulf of Mexico. Since BP was paying for genetic research to increase oil well flow and production, logic dictates that BP needed to apply a newly created microorganism or microorganisms produced by their alliance with Synthetic Genomics to the oil reservoir located beneath their Mississippi Canyon Block 252 lease in the Gulf of Mexico. According to BP's submitted U.S. Minerals Management Service application, there were to be 2 exploration, not production, but exploration wells drilled in CAP, designated as wells A and B. Exploration wells are commonly used to inject or introduce microbial-enhanced oil recovery microorganisms and their nutrients into an oil reservoir for increased present and future production. The first exploration well had been partially drilled by Transocean in October 2009, but the Marianas semi-submersible drilling rig was damaged by Hurricane Ida and was removed for repairs in late November 2009. On February 3, 2010, the Deepwater Horizon semi-submersible rig began exploration drilling to complete the unfinished drilling operation of the Marianas rig. On February 13, 2010, BP informed the MMS that they were experiencing uncontrollable bursts of gas and large cracks at the base of the well. That was the reason they filed for and were granted a permit to abandon and cap the well the same day on February 13, 2010. Shortly after, Deepwater Horizon commenced drilling the other exploratory well for BP. We all know the result of the second drilling operation that destroyed the Deepwater Horizon rig on April 22, 2010. One fact that can't be refuted regarding both exploratory wells is the extreme gas pressures coming from the oil reservoir and the resulting cracks on the ocean floor. MEOR microorganisms can be applied to an oil reservoir where they grow between the oil and the well's rock surface to enhance oil recovery. As a byproduct of that metabolism, and as I just mentioned before, microorganisms produce carbon dioxide gas, and this gas accumulates and displaces the oil by driving it up and out of the ground. At the same time, microorganisms can break down the thickness or viscosity of the oil so that it's thinner and can flow much easier. The published commercial goal of the BP Synthetic Genomics Alliance was to create new genetically engineered microorganisms to increase the flow of oil. A public trademark of that research involves man-made genomes, synthetic DNA, controlling new artificial cellular organisms. Because of the vast estimated reserves of oil at Mississippi Canyon 252 in the Gulf of Mexico, the temperatures involved, and its extreme low oxygen depth, previous known or lab-enhanced microorganisms would not be effective in creating an increased flow of the oil. Now one can only imagine what the results would be of a new MEOR synthetic bacteria that had a computer DNA design capability to replicate itself rapidly in such an extreme environment. The outcome would be unpredictable since it had never been tested in those conditions before. Or had it? Let's connect the dots to see more of this picture. Say hello to Cynthia. Synthia. In 2003, JCVI successfully synthesized a small virus that infects bacteria. By 2008, the JCVI team was able to synthesize a small bacterial genome. On May 6, 2010, JCVI revealed they had already created a self-replicating bacterial cell controlled by a chemically synthesized genome they called synthetic mycoplasma mycoides JCVI Syn 1.0. This completely synthetic cell with its computer-designed genome has absolutely no natural DNA. The ETC group from Canada named it Cynthia, Synthia, and it contains added watermark chains to identify the genome as artificial. It also has antibiotic resistance indicators. Now one can only speculate why this artificial bacterium has an inherent programmed capability to resist antibiotics. This new life form has the ability to replicate itself and organically function in any cell to which it's been introduced. Its DNA is artificial, and it's this synthetic DNA that takes control of a cell and is credited with being the building block of life. This is the first self-replicating synthetic bacterial cell thanks to its computer-generated DNA. All the funding for this came from, guess who? Synthetic Genomics Incorporated. The company BP has a sizable equity position and alliance with. No, BP is definitely way beyond petroleum, just as their new slogan publicizes. Now, why watermark this artificial genome? Well, doing so makes it identifiable as the unique and patented or patent pending asset that it is. That means it's privately owned. So what happens if a human becomes infected with a life-threatening variant bacterial species of Cynthia. Well, if you use penicillin to fight the infection, it won't do any good. Antibiotic resistance is an inherent part of its DNA sequence. So any use of antibiotics would be a waste of time. What would happen if mankind is contaminated by the self-reproducing artificial life form by contact or by breathing it? Would we become subjective to the DNA of the synthetic cells flowing through our bodies? Would these Cynthia cells combine with other bacteria within us to create a new deadly bacteria? Since a microorganism is created and gets its programming from computers, would we become subject to artificial electromagnetic frequencies only recognized by these genomes? There are a lot of questions that need to be answered. But what matters most is this: will we find out those answers in time? Let's keep connecting the dots. I think the picture's starting to take a little bit of shape now. So how do we get rid of all of this oil? The oil is there deep in the Gulf of Mexico. It's not going anywhere. It has a continual supply. There are no plumes of oil. There are deep lakes of oil. In a True News Radio interview with Rick Wells on June 28, 2010, the late oil industry expert Matt Simmons stated, BP claimed to have the only technology to deal with this when asked why the U.S. government wasn't taking over the Gulf oil crisis. Considering their 3-year alliance with synthetic genomics and the genetic creations they've made, it's very possible that the U.S. federal corporation in D.C. was convinced that BP's breakthrough genomic technologies were the better gambling odds. There had never been so large an amount of crude oil to deal with before. Now, for decades, scientists have eagerly pursued genetic modifications that would enhance natural microbial abilities to eat up oil spills on both land and sea. Even with DNA recombinance and bacterial gene splicing, there's been little positive success with improving on nature's natural oil eaters. Although his announcement silently slipped past the ears of news reporters from around the world, JCVI and synthetic genome founder Craig Venter foretold of and spoke openly of just such an application on May 15, 2010, during the public announcement of what the press is now calling Cynthia. He was referring to a Cynthia-based synthetic bacterial cell that would consume hydrocarbons, or oil, more efficiently than any known natural microorganism. You know, it's worthy to note that one of the first patents on a genetically engineered organism was a hydrocarbon-eating microbe in 1980. Called the oil eater, that microorganism was actually a naturally occurring bacteria that had been given 4 rings of DNA that were also naturally occurring. This gave the bacteria the ability to degrade 4 components of crude oil. Now that was back in 1980. A lot has changed since. Scientifically, there have always been problems with trying to take command of a natural microorganism. They're too unpredictable in diverse environmental conditions. While they do their job well in certain conditions, they can become dormant in other ecological surroundings. Marine chemist Chris Reddy of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution said that microbes are a lot like teenagers because they're hard to control. In contrast, artificial microbial life forms like Cynthia, are controlled by their computer-created DNA programming. Microbial ecologist Kenneth Lee says that only microbes can remove the oil from the ocean, and that biodegradation is what removes most of the oil from the environment. History proves the statements are correct, but the time involved can span many decades and beyond. We don't have that much time to deal with the oil in the Gulf. The last and only defense against the ongoing Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico is tiny billions of hydrocarbon-chewing microbes. In fact, the primary motive for using more than 830,000 gallons of chemical dispersants on the oil slick, both above and below the surface of the sea, is to break the oil into smaller droplets that bacteria can more easily consume. Alas, if there was only a super high efficient microorganism available that could do the job much faster and more efficiently. Just a few more dots to connect, and you'll start to see the picture. Let's talk about the dispersant factor. It's been puzzling to understand why BP has chosen to continually spray dispersants such as Corexit from airplanes and boats day and night since early May 2010. The spraying hasn't just been over the Gulf, but along the coastlines as well. And while it's claimed that Corexit disperses oil by breaking it into smaller pieces, can this be the only reason for all this spraying? In recent tests of rainwater originating from the Gulf of Mexico, natural mineral elements such as copper and iron were found along with nickel, aluminum, and manganese. Now that's very unusual for rain clouds originating from a saline ocean. The only logical explanation is that these elements were introduced to the Gulf water where they were drawn up by the rain clouds. The only way that could have happened is from aerial and surface spraying and or below surface injection. Are these ingredients of Corexit the dispersant? Well, not according to Nalco, the manufacturer. So then these natural earth elements must have been added to what's being sprayed along with the Corexit. But why? What benefit is there to add elements like copper or iron to seawater? After all, these are natural elements and nutrients you'd add to your garden to make your plants grow. So why add them to the seawater? Bacteria thrive in rich nutrient environments. Natural minerals are necessary building blocks for the nutrients that bacteria thrive on. Think of it as hydrofertilizing the Gulf to make it a better nutritional medium for real hungry oil-eating bacteria. The so-called dispersants are not only breaking down the crude oil into smaller particles, they're adding needed enhancement minerals so that the bacterium can multiply more rapidly and eat up the oil faster. Such bacteria are called bioremediators. Now, you know, some more dots are forming and the picture's getting a little bit larger. We're getting close. Let's discuss why Cynthia has a cousin. The only ingredient missing is a new and previously unknown genus of hydrocarbon-eating bacteria that can survive cold water depths, where the lakes of oil and tar now sit, so that it could degrade it faster than any known natural bacterias. In a paper published in the journal Science, Terry Hazen and his colleagues at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory discovered in late May to early June 2010 that a previously unknown species of cold water hydrocarbon-eating bacteria have been feasting on the underwater oil plumes, degrading them at accelerated rates. We can now understand why on May 15th, BP Synthetic Genome's CEO Craig Venter hinted of a new hydrocarbon-eating synthetic genome. Prior to that date, JCVI had already applied for numerous additional patents, and we were able to find 7 of them, regarding synthetic bioremediation, such as bacteria synthetic genomes, which provide unique DNA information required for replication of a free living organism. Well, in layman terms, this means that BP and synthetic genome scientists had already created self-replicating bacteria, or self-reproducing bacteria, wherein the assembled DNA molecule is a synthetic genome. And that was back in 2007. Just a few more connecting dots and we might be able to see the picture. Hurricanes and genome vaccines. Let's talk about that. As I stated on WVP Radio during our premiere broadcast in August, there won't be any hurricanes entering into the Gulf of Mexico this year. There haven't been, and there won't be. Otherwise, both the hurricanes and the altered jet stream will send the synthetic bacteria all around the world. They have to isolate their biologically created nightmare until they can either find a way to control it or create a synthetic genome microbial vaccine to neutralize its effects. Could that have been their plan all along? On October 7, 2010, Synthetic Genomics, the BP Equity Investment Company, and JCVI announced the formation of a new company named Synthetic Genomics Vaccines Incorporated. This privately held company will focus on developing the next generation of vaccines using JCVI's genomic sequencing and synthetic genomic expertise, coupled with the intellectual property and business of synthetic genomics, and that will significantly advance and enhance vaccine development. Now, how amazing that the BP Synthetic Genomics Alliance now has its own vaccine company for patented or patent-pending immunizations. But at what cost to humanity? It's convenient and very profitable to not only create synthetic bacteria, but to also offer a vaccine in case there are any problems. When you create the bacteria and control its DNA, you also know how to shut it down. Definitely. BP is beyond petroleum. According to Fernanda Gandara, the president of this new company, we are excited to apply our advanced synthetic genomic technologies to revolutionize vaccine production. Yes, Fernanda, I'm sure you and BP are. But what are the human effects? Synthetic biology is a high-risk, profit-driven field, building organisms out of parts that are still poorly understood. We know that lab-created life forms can escape, become biological weapons, and that their use threatens existing natural biodiversity. But most worrying of all, Craig Venter is handing this powerful technology to the world's most irresponsible and environmentally damaging industry by partnering partnering with the likes of BP and even Exxon to hasten the commercialization of synthetic life forms. Now we have scientific confirmation of, quote, a previously unknown species of cold water hydrocarbon-eating bacteria, end quote. And they're gobbling up the oil in the Gulf. Nothing is known about how this new synthetic bioremediation bacterium that's now in the Gulf reacts with mankind. This is virgin and uncharted territory. We already know how sea mammals such as whales and porpoises have reacted. Those who haven't escaped the affected areas of the Gulf have died, along with all other marine life and coastal vegetation. While human health effects from crude oil exposure are very well known, the effects of dispersants containing oil-eating artificial bacteria are not known. It's never been done before, let alone at the immense scale of operations now taking place. There's a reason the so-called dispersants are guarded by weapon-wielding soldiers and local armed law enforcement in the warehouses and deployment yards along the Gulf Coast. If a sample were to be analyzed by knowledgeable people, the biological and chemical anomalies it contains would be made public, right down to the unique signature. BP keeps allowing their sorcerer's brew to be called Corexit in order to hide the fact that it's not just the name brand product any longer. Perhaps that's because Craig Venter's research boat is named Sorcerer 2. The physical symptoms of the BP flu, BP crud, blue flu, or whatever name you choose to call it, are as unique as the synthetic bacteria being used in the Gulf of Mexico. Since mankind is carbon-based, how did these synthetically created hydrogen and carbon-hungry bacteria react to human flesh? Well, internal bleeding as well as ulcerating skin lesions are physical signs of their computer-created DNA signature. BP and their paid minions have released a synthetic biological plague in the Gulf of Mexico, and it's out of control. The entire world is a victim of their greed and their foolishness. By playing the role of creator, they've begun a very dangerous game with infinite repercussions for life as we know it. Those who have permitted and agreed to this cover-up are just as responsible as BP. The corporate people are proud to let everybody know they're beyond petroleum. Those of us living on the Gulf Coast must demand from every politician and every government agency from the national right down to the local level a full explanation as to why they allowed this to happen and why they are allowing it to continue. They're all responsible for lying to us and covering up the truth. Have you connected all the dots yet? Do you see the complete picture yet? The Gulf Blue Plague has evolved. Now, here's a good question that you need to find the answer to. Since mankind is carbon-based, scientifically speaking, we're all carbon-based. How do these synthetically created hydrogen and carbon-hungry bacteria react to human flesh? I'll tell you exactly how. And these are why these are unique symptoms. Internal bleeding,
as well as ulcerated skin lesions, are the physical signs of that computer-created DNA signature. And if you don't believe that, find a science lab to do a DNA test. That was one of the things that puzzled me so much about our water sample. I sent it to a person in a outside North America university, national university lab. This person is a research biologist and virologist, studies viruses, and is also head of the whole department at the National University. Now, with that water sample, I was told 4 weeks ago that they could not figure out the DNA signature on the bacteria that was in that water. They were trying to compare it to everything from Ebola bacteria to other bacteria, all the other bacteria that are known, that are in the textbooks, that are found in oceans and even the Gulf of Mexico. They could not match up that DNA signature. And they stopped doing the work on those samples because there is no such DNA signature that's in the books anywhere. Now that is why I know it's a synthetic bacteria that's there now. That's the reason that this article is so important. If a professional has taken a water sample and identifies that there is a DNA and certain bacteria there, but it is not the DNA of the natural bacteria that are known, interesting, isn't it? So BP and their paid minions have released a synthetic biological plague. I really mean it when I say a synthetic biological plague. And they've released it in the Gulf of Mexico to get rid of the oil, and possibly released even more to make the oil flow faster out of the wells, and possibly blew up the freaking well doing it. The entire world is a victim of what they've done in the Gulf of Mexico with their synthetic biological plague. The internal bleeding, ulcerated skin lesions, bleeding out of rectum, out of vaginas, out of ears, out of noses, out of eyes. Organs just bleeding like crazy. That's what's really going on around the Gulf of Mexico. I know you haven't had it in the news. That's because BP and the U.S. federal government say it's all over pretty much. No, it's not. It's getting worse. And this is why it's getting worse. Now, can you understand why they couldn't allow hurricanes to come into the Gulf of Mexico and spread this around the world? Those who have allowed and agreed to the cover-up about this are just as responsible as BP. Those of us who live on the Gulf Coast, we need to demand, not ask, but absolutely demand of every single politician, every government agency, all the alphabet agencies they've got roaming around here with a heads up somewhere, you know where. FEMA comes to mind. Of course, BP's no better, but we have to demand answers from them. All the way from a local level, over our local governments, all the way to the national level. We need an explanation, not only as to why they allowed it to happen, starting February 13th when BP had their meeting at the White House with Obama, why they allowed it to happen, and even more, I want answers as to who's responsible for allowing it to continue. And whoever is responsible, they and BP need to be put on trial. Not for civil charges, criminal charges. Matt Simmons was right. That's what the cover-up was all about. BP and all the rest who are in the cover-up with them, and it looks like every alphabet kind of agency or department, that you can think of between national and local and state and county and every other kind of government and even private. They're all responsible for lying to us and covering up the truth. So now let me describe the final picture. Two blue, round cells growing in a petri dish. Colonies that are beginning, and they're blue. Now you know why I named it the blue flu. And that picture that's on our site and on Jeff Rent's site, rents.com, about the Gulf blue plague, that picture is right there, a synthetic transformed bacteria, controlled totally by synthetic DNA. That's the kind of stuff we got in the Gulf. That's why everybody goes, well, it comes on like flu symptoms, but it's a whole lot worse. Yeah, it's a whole lot worse because this stuff is in us. It's in the air and it's in the water. Now, it does affect those in the water the most. It takes a lot of exposure of actually living right along the edge of the water where all this oil is. And remember, wherever the oil is where the synthetic bacteria is. They eat it up. Now, that explains why a lot of people go, oh, there's some weird colors to this stuff that's coming up out of the bottom and floating on the surface. Yeah, it's being eaten up by a synthetic genome-controlled bacteria. And yes, that stuff's getting in the air, and it's all over the water, and it's on the beaches. It's everywhere. And it's going to keep on eating. And it apparently just loves the heck out of human flesh. Take a look at the pictures on the internet with Project Gulf Impact of Kendra Arneson, and look at that ulcerated lesion on her. And she said, oh, you should have seen the ones that were on my back. We have neurological problems as well. And I can say that I'm one of them that has those problems because I got fingers on my left side that tingle constantly now. And I know that I was exposed a couple times going out of my boat. I've hardly had any exposure compared to those that are living in along the Gulf up north in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, and Texas, and the north coast of Florida. But apparently I've had enough. I'd like to know why the cover-up is there. Not only like to know, I demand to know. I absolutely, flat out demand to know. And that's why I'm asking everybody who's listening, and even if you're listening in the archives, go to our site, worldvisionportal.org. Go look at the article there. Go to rents.com. Go in his featured section. Go pull the article off of there. If you're in our chat room right now, our live chat, get those links down. Take a picture of the page if you have to, or don't sign off until you can get all the links down. These are all part of putting the picture together. Yeah, the blue flag, the Gulf blue flag, is about as real can be, and it's synthetic. And that is why the symptoms are not symptoms of anything else that's been known, and that is why there is a DNA signature on that particular previously unknown, as the scientists said, their quote, unknown oil-eating bacteria in the deep water. Well, it's known. We're going to have to come up with a name with it. I mean, we got Cynthia. I just call it, Cynthia's cousin. Maybe we'll have a contest to find out what it is that looks like it's going to kill a lot of people. Why don't we call it BP Hell? I think all these people need to be criminally charged. And that comes from everybody at BP to those who created these new life forms. What the hell do they think they're doing with the world? And look at what they've done to people who live along the Gulf. Most of the people have been fighting so hard to get the truth out about the Gulf. They're exhausted and sick. And people like Pensacola Greg, he wiped everything off of his internet site and his blogs and Facebook and everything else after he was on Jeff Rant's show. He gives up. He's just too sick and too tired, and even his neighbors won't listen to him. And I know that feeling. Mine won't listen to me either. But I'm not giving up. I found out what they released into the Gulf. Thank God I had the vision to see it. And that's the only reason I knew it was there. And now I just gave you all the proof. It's there. It's really there. And it's synthetic. And it's a new life form. And it doesn't work well with mammals. The porpoises die. You know, we're mammals just like porpoises and whales. It's no wonder it ate their flesh. It eats ours too. That's how serious it is. You want this around the world? Sooner or later it's gonna be around the world. It's gonna happen. Just take the warning from those of us who have to live through it now. Because enough is enough. We're used as guinea pigs in a synthetic genomic experiment. And enough is enough. Now, if you live along the Gulf Coast, I hope you find this program. And I hope you get as indignant and pissed off as I am. I live here. I don't want to move. But I don't want to be the victim of criminals either. And yep, I'm calling it for what it is. What BP has done is criminal. And they need to be charged. But then when those who are covering them up are the ones who are supposed to have the courts to charge them, I seriously doubt that'll happen unless we can change those who control the courts and the rest of the governments. So maybe it's time for that. To allow this to happen and to allow people to have their skin and their organs eaten alive by a genetically unknown synthetic bacteria is more than criminal.
Has now escalated into a man-made synthetic biological nightmare of unknown proportions. Let's address synthetic genomics. On June 13th, 2007, BP made a long-term research and development deal and an undisclosed equity investment into a company named Synthetic Genomics Incorporated based in Rockville, Maryland. Synthetic Genomics was co-founded by Dr. J. Craig Venter with the purpose of commercializing genomic-driven technologies. Genomics is the scientific study of the entire DNA sequence of an organism's genome. A genome is all the genetic information in the chromosomes of an organism, including its genes and DNA sequences. Now, the BP Synthetic Genomics Alliance has recovered the DNA from subsurface hydrocarbon substrates. What that means is biological organisms in crude oil. And they've applied that recovered DNA through sequencing methods. What this means is that they took the DNA from underground crude oil reservoir microbial cells, such as bacteria or viruses, and cultured them in a lab to identify, isolate, and interpret their chemical and genetic properties. Additional sequencing methods beyond the initial identity and isolation stages were also carried out. Now, a central part of the deal between BP and Synthetic Genomics was to create biological transfer processes for crude oil that would lead to improved recovery rates. Their goal was to develop new microbes with lab-created genomes that would improve the flow of gas and oil from out of a oil reservoir. Now, for an oil producer like BP, more oil and gas being recovered from a source means more profits. And in fact, many wells and many oil reservoirs for crude oil only produce about 50% because of the problems in getting it out of the wellhead. So this process of increasing the flow of oil, or the improved recovery rate, is known as microbial enhanced oil recovery, or MEOR. Now, MEOR is simply the use of microorganisms such as bacteria or viruses or any kind of microorganism to retrieve additional petroleum production from out of an oil reservoir. Microorganisms are introduced or injected into oil wells to produce byproducts which help propel the oil out of the well. Now, because these processes help to mobilize the oil and assist with the oil flow, they allow a greater amount to be recovered from the well. MEOR is a direct application of biotechnology. It uses biological materials such as bacteria, microorganisms, and the products of their metabolism to assist the movement of oil out of a well. Other applications include genetic engineering techniques and recombinant DNA technology, and they're used to develop new strains of bacteria with improved oil recovery traits. The microorganisms can be applied to an entire oil reservoir. Thank you for joining us on a special edition of WVP Radio. You're listening to Living Light with Michael Edward. For downloads of this broadcast, please go to worldvisionportal.org, or for the radio broadcast, go to blogtalkradio.com/WVP. And hopefully you're catching this on video at YouTube, youtube.com/WVP Radio. We'd like to discuss on this special broadcast something very important, not only to the residents that live along the Gulf Coast at the Gulf of Mexico, but to everyone in the world, as we feel this affects everyone. Currently, it mostly affects those in the Gulf of Mexico living along the coast, as I do. But we know if this isn't handled properly, it will affect everyone very quickly, and we need to let you know what the truth is. That's what this broadcast is all about. So thank you again for joining us in this special edition of WVP Radio. The Gulf Blue Plague. You know, it's not wise to fool Mother Nature. Those who think they can get away with it will abruptly learn that payback can be more than they bargained for. That's because nature will always retaliate in subtle retorts that shake the very foundations of this earth, as well as life itself. Playing the role of creator is a very dangerous game. As part of their new logo and corporate image campaign, British Petroleum wants the public to think of them as their new slogan says, Beyond Petroleum. BP is far more than a simple oil company. What is revealed in this broadcast regarding BP and their Beyond Petroleum activities, both prior to and including their Gulf of Mexico catastrophe, will create a picture for the listener, one pixel dot at a time. Once the person who hears everything presented here connects all the dots of this picture, it will be more than obvious that BP has tried to fool Mother Nature. And she's retaliating with a vengeance that is affecting the entire world. This is a perilous game that has now gotten out of control. What began in the Gulf of Mexico as early as February 2010